The gunshot that took Katherine Sullivan's husband echoed through the harsh Montana winter, leaving her alone with 3 hungry children and a mountain of debt in the unforgiving year of 1878. The blood-stained snow outside their modest homestead marked not just the end of a life, but the beginning of a desperate struggle for survival. "Mama, when's Pa coming back?" 5-year-old Samuel asked, his innocent eyes looking up at Katherine as she tucked him into bed that night, her hands still trembling from identifying her husband's body earlier that day. "He's not, my love," she whispered, her voice breaking as she smoothed his sandy hair. "Your father has gone to heaven." Samuel's little face crumpled. "But who's going to help us now?" It was the question that haunted Katherine through the long, cold nights that followed. With 7-year-old Elizabeth and 2-year-old Lily also depending on her, Katherine knew that grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. The small homestead outside of Whispering Creek, Montana would be her salvation or her ruin. The town marshal had been sympathetic but offered little help beyond his condolences. "Bank's already asking about your mortgage, Mrs. Sullivan," he'd said, hat in hand at her door 3 days after the burial. "Your husband owed more than folks knew." Katherine had stood straighter, despite the exhaustion pulling at her bones. "I'll manage, Marshal. We're staying." But managing meant more than determination. It meant food on the table, coal for the stove, and keeping the bank at bay. The small amount of money James had left wasn't enough to last the month, let alone until spring when she might be able to plant. She took in washing, sewed for the families in town, and even sold most of her good dresses to the mercantile for store credit. Every night, she sat at her kitchen table after the children were asleep, tallying figures in a ledger by lamplight, watching their savings dwindle as winter deepened. February brought a merciless blizzard, trapping them in the house for nearly a week. By the time the snow cleared enough for Katherine to make it into town, their pantry was nearly bare. She hitched their old mare to the wagon with trembling fingers and made the arduous journey into Whispering Creek, her children bundled beside her. The mercantile was busy with others who'd been snowed in, all eager to replenish supplies. Katherine clutched her small purse, knowing she'd have to choose between flour, sugar, or coffee. She couldn't afford all 3. Mrs. Sullivan, Mr. Peterson, the store owner, greeted her with a look that mixed pity and concern. "I was hoping you'd make it in. Got a message for you from the bank." Her heart sank as he handed her an envelope. The contents were as grim as she'd expected. The bank would foreclose in 30 days if payment wasn't received. "Thank you," she said, pocketing the notice with as much dignity as she could muster. "I'll need 5 pounds of flour and whatever coffee beans you can give me for 50 cents. Mr. Peterson frowned. "That won't see you through the week, Mrs. Sullivan. It's all I can afford today." The storekeeper looked at her 3 children waiting patiently by her side. Elizabeth, old enough to understand their predicament, kept a protective arm around Lily while Samuel stared longingly at the candy jars on the counter. "Tell you what," Mr. Peterson said, lowering his voice. "I need help with the bookkeeping. My eyes ain't what they used to be. You come in 3 days a week, and I'll pay you fair. Not charity," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "I need the help, and I hear you're good with figures." Katherine swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. "I would be grateful for the work, Mr. Peterson." That night, with a pot of beans simmering on the stove and the children playing with carved wooden animals on the floor, Katherine allowed herself a moment of hope. The job wouldn't solve everything, but it might keep them fed until she figured out what to do about the bank. Her respite was short-lived. A knock at the door revealed Mr. Daniels, the bank manager, standing on her porch with his ledger. "Mrs. Sullivan, I thought we might discuss your situation directly," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I understand you've received our notice." "I have," Katherine replied, gesturing for the children to go to their room. "And I intend to make payment arrangements." Mr. Daniels smiled thinly. "I'm afraid arrangements won't suffice. The full amount is due, as stated." "That's impossible, and you know it," Katherine said, her voice low to keep the children from hearing. "My husband was killed, Mr. Daniels. Surely there's some consideration. Business is business, Mrs. Sullivan." "However," he said, his eyes traveling slowly around the modest cabin before settling on her face, "there might be another solution. A woman in your position needs protection, guidance. I'm a widower myself, and quite comfortable. I could solve your financial troubles permanently. Katherine stared at him, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. Are you proposing marriage, Mr. Daniels? I'm offering security, he replied, stepping closer. For you and your children. Consider it carefully. She stepped back, her spine hitting the edge of the kitchen table. I think you should leave, Mr. Daniels. His smile disappeared. Don't be foolish. You'll lose everything. I'm giving you a chance most widows would grab with both hands. And I'm giving you the chance to leave my home with your dignity intact, Katherine replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Good evening. After he left, Katherine sank into a chair at the kitchen table, her hands shaking as she poured herself a cup of the precious coffee. The children remained quiet in their room, sensing the tension even through the closed door. The next morning, Katherine woke before dawn and began preparing breakfast. It was Thursday market day in town, and she had decided to set up a table to sell pies. Her mother had taught her to bake, and though ingredients were scarce, she had enough to make 4 apple pies using the last of their preserved fruit. As she worked the dough, Elizabeth came into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Can I help, Mama? Katherine smiled. Of course, sweetheart. Could you watch Lily and Samuel while I finish these? Then we'll all go to town together. The market was already bustling when they arrived. Katherine found a small space at the edge and set up her modest display for carefully wrapped pies and a hand-lettered sign. Sullivan's Home baking 25 cents per slice, $1 for whole pie. The first hours passed slowly. A few people stopped to look, but most hurried past with barely a glance. By midday, she had sold only 3 slices. Mama, I'm hungry, Samuel complained, kicking at the dirt beneath their table. Me too, added Lily, thumb in her mouth. Katherine cut a small slice from one of the pies and divided it between them. Share this, children. We'll eat properly when we get home. But what about you? Elizabeth asked, ever watchful. I'm not hungry yet, Katherine lied, ignoring the emptiness in her stomach. As the afternoon wore on, the market began to thin. Katherine was about to pack up when a shadow fell across her table. Looking up, she saw a tall man with broad shoulders and a weathered face partially obscured by the brim of his hat. Dust clung to his clothes, marking him as someone who'd been on the trail. Those pies still for sale? He asked, his voice deep and rough around the edges. Yes, sir, Katherine replied, straightening her shoulders. 25 cents a slice or $1 for a whole pie. He studied her display, then looked at the 3 children sitting quietly behind the table. His gaze lingered on Samuel's thin face and Lily's too large dress. I'll take them all, he said, pulling out his wallet. Katherine blinked in surprise. All of them? But there are 3 whole pies left. Reckon I'm hungry enough, he said with a slight smile that softened his rugged features. He counted out $3 and placed them on the table. Name's Henry Caldwell, madam. Just rode into town. Katherine Sullivan, she replied, gathering the pies. And these are my children, Elizabeth, Samuel, and Lily. He nodded to each of them, his eyes warm. Pleasure to meet you all. These pies heading back with me to the hotel. Best meal I'll have had in weeks, I'd wager. As Katherine wrapped the pies in brown paper, she noticed his hands strong and calloused, but gentle as he accepted the packages. There was something about him that seemed at odds with his trail-worn appearance, an air of quiet dignity that reminded her of her late husband. Thank you for your business, Mr. Caldwell, she said, tucking the precious dollars into her pocket. Call me Henry, he replied. And if you're baking more of these, I'll be around for a spell. Katherine watched him walk away, his tall figure weaving through the remaining market-goers. For the first time in months, she felt a flutter of something other than fear in her chest. The next morning, Katherine rose early again, using some of the money to buy more ingredients from the mercantile. She baked 6 pies, this time apple, berry, and peach from their dwindling preserves. The children helped, their spirits lifted by the prospect of enough money for a proper meal. At the market, she set up in the same spot, but today added a small sign. Hot coffee 5 cents. The morning trade was better than before. Word had spread about her pies, and by noon, she had sold half her stock. There was no sign of Henry Caldwell, however, and Katherine tried to ignore the twinge of disappointment. As she was serving a slice to Mrs. Thompson, the dressmaker, she spotted him across the square, deep in conversation with the sheriff. He wore a clean shirt today, his dark hair combed back from his forehead, revealing a strong profile. As if sensing her gaze, he turned and caught her eye, tipping his hat with a slight smile before returning to his discussion. "Handsome man, that one," Mrs. Thompson commented, following Catherine's gaze. "Came into town 2 days ago. I hear he's looking to settle somewhere in the territory." "Is that so?" Catherine replied, keeping her tone neutral as she handed over the pie. "Indeed. Sheriff says he's some kind of cattle broker from Texas. Has money, by the looks of him." Catherine nodded politely, but her mind was churning. A cattle broker might need a place to stay longer than a hotel room would allow. Perhaps he might rent a room from her. The thought came unbidden, but once there, she couldn't dismiss it. The extra income would help tremendously with the bank deadline looming. Later that afternoon, as the market was winding down, Henry approached her table again. He wore a sheepskin coat against the February chill, and his boots were polished, unlike the dust-covered ones from the day before. "Mrs. Sullivan," he greeted her. "I see your pies are popular today. Thanks to your generous purchase yesterday," she replied. Word spread. He smiled, the expression warming his blue eyes. "Happy to help. Though I confess, I ate every bite myself. Best pies I've had since leaving Texas." Catherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks at the compliment. "Thank you. I have one peach left, if you're interested." "I surely am. And I was wondering if I might trouble you for something else." He hesitated, removing his hat. "I understand you live outside town a ways." "I'm looking to buy property in the area and need a place to stay while I scout locations. The hotel's fine for sleeping, but I miss home cooking and a proper hearth. Would you consider taking in a boarder?" Catherine stared at him, startled by how closely his request matched her earlier thoughts. "A boarder? Yes, madam. I'd pay well room and board, plus extra for meals. I'm clean, quiet, and can handle any repairs your place might need." She hesitated, keenly aware of the 3 pairs of little eyes watching from behind her. Taking in a strange man was risky, yet the sheriff seemed to know him, and the money would be a godsend. "I have a small room off the kitchen," she said finally. "It's modest, but clean." Henry nodded. "Sounds perfect. When would be convenient for me to see it?" "We're heading home now, if you'd care to follow." Henry insisted on helping load her market supplies into the wagon, then mounted his horse, a handsome chestnut gelding that Samuel immediately admired. The journey to the Sullivan homestead took almost an hour, with Henry riding alongside the wagon, occasionally pointing out wildlife to the children. Catherine watched him surreptitiously during the ride. He was older than she'd first thought, perhaps in his mid-30s, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years in the sun. There was a scar along his jaw, partially hidden by stubble, and his hands moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to hard work. The house came into view as they crested a small hill, a 2-story cabin with a wraparound porch, smoke curling from the chimney where the banked morning fire still smoldered. It wasn't grand, but James had built it with care, adding to it each year as their family grew. "It's a fine place," Henry commented as they approached. "Good location, sheltered from the north wind." "My husband built it," Catherine said, a note of pride in her voice. "We came here just after we married, 8 years ago." Henry helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a moment, they stood close, and Catherine caught the scent of soap and leather. She stepped back quickly, turning to help the children down. "Elizabeth, please take Lily and Samuel inside and wash up," she instructed. "I'll show Mr. Caldwell the boarding room." The room was small but neat, with a single bed, a chest of drawers, and a small desk beneath the window. It had been James's study, but Catherine had cleared his personal effects after his death, unable to bear seeing them daily. "This would suit me fine, Mrs. Sullivan," Henry said, ducking his head slightly under the low door frame. "What would you consider fair for room and board?" They negotiated a price that was generous without seeming like charity. Henry would move in the following day and stay at least through March, possibly longer depending on his business in the area. As they stood on the porch finalizing the arrangement, Catherine felt a curious mixture of relief and anxiety. The boarding money would help tremendously with their immediate needs, but having a stranger in their home, a man she knew nothing about beyond his name and occupation, was daunting. "One more thing," Henry said, as if reading her thoughts. "I believe in earning my keep beyond payment. I noticed your corral fence needs mending, and there's firewood to be split. I'd be happy to tend to those while I'm here. Katherine swallowed against the sudden tightness in her throat. That would be very helpful, Mr. Caldwell. Thank you. He nodded, replacing his hat. I'll return tomorrow afternoon, then. Good day, Mrs. Sullivan. As he rode away, Katherine stood watching until he disappeared from view. Only then did she realize her hands were trembling. Mama. Elizabeth appeared at her side. Is the man going to live with us now? Just for a while, sweetheart. He's going to rent the study room. I like him, Samuel declared, joining them on the porch. He knows about horses. Katherine smiled, ruffling her son's hair. Well, we'll see. Now, let's go inside and make supper. We've had a good day at market. That night, after the children were asleep, Katherine sat at the kitchen table counting the day's earnings. Between the pies and Henry's advance payment for the room, she had enough to make a partial payment to the bank. It wouldn't satisfy Mr. Daniels completely, but it might buy her more time. As promised, Henry arrived the following afternoon with his belongings: 2 saddlebags, a trunk, and a rifle in a leather scabbard. He settled into the room quickly, then immediately set to work on the corral fence without being asked, working until dusk fell. When he came in for supper, the children watched him with undisguised curiosity as Katherine served a simple meal of stew and cornbread. Mr. Caldwell, Samuel asked, breaking the silence. Have you ever shot a bear? Samuel, Katherine admonished. That's not polite dinner conversation. Henry smiled. It's all right. And yes, young man, I have, but only when necessary, for protection. Animals deserve our respect. Did you fight in the war? Elizabeth asked, more reserved but equally curious. A shadow crossed Henry's face. I did. The last year of it, when I was barely more than a boy. Which side? Katherine asked softly. Union. My family had a small ranch near the Texas-New Mexico border. We didn't hold with slavery. Katherine nodded, relieved. James had fought for the Union as well, though he rarely spoke of it. The war had ended 13 years ago, but its divisions still ran deep in many places. Do you have children, Mr. Caldwell? Elizabeth continued her questioning. A look of pain flickered in his eyes, so briefly Katherine thought she might have imagined it. No, Miss Elizabeth, I don't. Never had the pleasure of a family of my own. Why not? Samuel persisted, earning another reproving look from his mother. Samuel, that's enough questions for tonight, Katherine said firmly. Mr. Caldwell is our guest, not a subject for interrogation. It's quite all right, Henry assured her. Children are naturally curious. He turned to Samuel. I spent many years on the move, young man. Hard to plant roots when you're always chasing the horizon. After dinner, Henry insisted on helping with the dishes despite Katherine's protests. As they worked side by side, she stealing glances at his profile, she found herself wondering about the life he'd led, what had kept him moving, what sorrows or joys had shaped the man now standing in her kitchen. You have fine children, Mrs. Sullivan, he said as he dried the last plate. You've done well by them. Thank you, she replied, touched by the simple compliment. They're all I have left of their father. May I ask what happened to him? Katherine hesitated, then decided there was no reason to hide the truth. He was shot during a robbery attempt at the Mercantile in town. Wrong place, wrong time. That was 3 months ago. Henry's expression darkened. I'm sorry for your loss. Did they catch who did it? No. The marshal searched, but the trail went cold. She busied herself with wiping down the table, unwilling to dwell on the memory. And you, Mr. Caldwell? You mentioned Texas. What brings you to Montana? Opportunity, he replied. The cattle business is changing. I'm looking to establish new routes, maybe set up a permanent operation. Montana has good grazing land, fair water rights. Their conversation was interrupted by Lily's cry from the children's room. Katherine excused herself and went to settle her youngest, finding her awake from a nightmare. By the time Lily was soothed back to sleep, Henry had retired to his room, a lamp still burning behind his closed door. The days fell into a pattern. Henry would rise before dawn, tend to his horse and help with morning chores, then ride out for the day on whatever business he was conducting. He would return by supper, often bringing small treats for the children: peppermint sticks, a wooden whistle for Samuel, ribbons for the girls. On market days, he would help Katherine load the wagon and sometimes accompany them to town, where his presence seemed to deter any unwanted attention. She noticed that Mr. Daniels kept his distance when Henry was nearby, which suited her perfectly. A week into his stay, Henry returned earlier than usual, carrying a large burlap sack. "Mrs. Sullivan," he called from the porch, "might I trouble you for some assistance?" Katherine came outside to find him holding a sack that moved and made small, distressed sounds. "What on earth?" "Found her abandoned near the creek," he said, carefully opening the sack to reveal a trembling black and white puppy, no more than a few months old. "Someone must have left her to fend for herself. She's half-starved." "Oh, the poor thing," Katherine breathed, taking the puppy from him. Its ribs were visible beneath the dirty fur, and it whimpered pitifully. "Thought the children might like to help care for her," Henry said, looking suddenly uncertain. "But I should have asked first. If it's an imposition, no, it's very thoughtful," Katherine assured him, cradling the puppy. "The children have been asking for a dog. James always said we'd get one when Samuel was older." The delight on the children's faces when they saw the puppy was worth any inconvenience. They named her Daisy and immediately set about making her a bed from an old blanket. Henry showed them how to feed her small amounts at first, explaining that her stomach would need time to adjust after near starvation. That evening, with Daisy curled up by the fire and the children finally in bed after much excitement, Katherine and Henry sat at the kitchen table, sharing a pot of tea. "Thank you for the puppy," she said. "I haven't seen them this happy in months." Henry smiled, the firelight casting warm shadows across his face. "My pleasure. Every child should have a dog. Teaches responsibility, loyalty. And where did you learn so much about caring for abandoned puppies, Mr. Caldwell?" "Henry, please," he corrected gently. "And I've rescued my share of creatures over the years. Had a knack for finding the lost ones, my mother used to say." Katherine studied him over the rim of her cup. "You're not what I expected from a cattle broker, Henry." "Oh, and what did you expect? Someone more hardened, perhaps, less concerned with orphaned puppies and children's ribbons." He chuckled, the sound warm in the quiet kitchen. "I've been hard when I needed to be, Mrs. Sullivan. But life's taught me that kindness costs nothing and pays dividends." "Katherine," she said, "if I'm to call you Henry, you should use my name as well." "Katherine," he repeated, and something in the way he said it made her heart beat faster. "It suits you." The moment stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with something unnamed. Finally, Katherine stood, gathering the teacups. "It's getting late. I should check on the children." Henry rose as well. "Of course. Good night, Katherine." "Good night, Henry." As February gave way to March, the weather began to soften. The snow melted in patches, revealing the first hints of green beneath. Henry continued his mysterious business dealings, sometimes gone for a full day, but always returning by nightfall. He had become an integral part of their routine. The children looked for him each evening, eager to share their day's adventures. Even Daisy would perk up at the sound of his horse approaching, running to greet him with enthusiastic barks. Katherine found herself watching the road for his return as well, though she tried to hide her anticipation. There was something comforting about his presence, the way he filled the empty chair at the table, the sound of his deep voice reading to the children before bed, the sense of security she felt knowing he was just on the other side of the kitchen wall as she slept. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset after the children were asleep, Henry broached a subject that had been hovering unspoken between them. "Katherine, I couldn't help overhearing your conversation with Mr. Daniels when he visited yesterday." He hesitated, turning his coffee mug in his hands. "Is the bank pressing you about the mortgage?" She stiffened slightly. Mr. Daniels had indeed come by, his manner just as unpleasant as before, despite the partial payment she'd made. "It's nothing I can't handle. I don't doubt your capability," Henry said carefully. "But if you need assistance, I don't need charity," she interrupted, more sharply than she'd intended. "I wasn't offering charity," he replied, his voice steady. "I was offering partnership. I've been looking at properties to buy, as you know. This land has everything I need: good water, grazing fields, solid structures. I'd pay fair market value, and you and the children would have the right to remain here." Katherine stared at him, stunned. "You want to buy our home?" "I want to invest in it," he clarified. "You'd retain ownership of the house itself and a portion of the land. I'd take the rest for my cattle operation. We'd be neighbors, essentially." "Why would you do this?" Henry set his mug down and turned to face her fully. Because I believe in what you're trying to do here, Katherine. Keeping your family together, making a life despite the hardships. It takes courage, and I admire that. She looked away, overwhelmed by his words and the emotion behind them. I need to think about it. Of course, there's no rush. But there was a rush, and they both knew it. The bank's deadline was approaching, and despite her increased income from the pies and Henry's board, she was still short of the full amount needed. That night, Katherine lay awake long after the house had gone quiet, weighing Henry's offer. It would solve their immediate financial problems, but accepting felt like admitting defeat somehow, like failing James's memory. Yet what would honor his memory more, holding stubbornly to ownership of land they might lose anyway, or ensuring his children had a secure home? The next morning, she found Henry in the barn, already saddled and ready to ride out. I've thought about your offer, she said without preamble. He turned, his expression carefully neutral. And, I'm willing to discuss terms, but I need to know more about your plans first. This is my children's future we're talking about. Relief flickered across his face. That's fair. I'll show you everything: my financial situation, my business plans, references from banks in Texas. Whatever you need to feel secure in the decision. Over the next few days, Henry was true to his word. He brought documents proving his standing with banks in Texas and New Mexico, letters from business associates attesting to his character, and detailed plans for the cattle operation he envisioned. Katherine was impressed despite her reservations. He was clearly successful, but more importantly, his vision for the land would complement rather than overshadow her own hopes for their homestead. They reached an agreement. Henry would purchase 2/3 of the property, leaving Katherine with the house, barn, and surrounding 10 acres. The sale would clear her debt with the bank and leave enough for improvements to the house and a small nest egg for emergencies. The day they signed the papers at the bank, Mr. Daniels could barely conceal his surprise and disappointment. This is most irregular, he muttered as he processed the transaction. But entirely legal, Henry pointed out pleasantly. Mrs. Sullivan retains her home and is now debt-free. I'd call that good business all around. As they left the bank, Katherine felt lighter than she had in months. Thank you, she said as they walked toward the mercantile where the children were waiting with Mr. Peterson. Not just for the transaction, but for your fairness throughout. Henry offered his arm, which she took after only a moment's hesitation. It's a good arrangement for us both. I get the land I need, and you keep your independence. That evening, they celebrated with a special dinner. Katherine used some of her newfound security to purchase a chicken, which she roasted with herbs from her winter stores. The children were excited by the changes, especially when Henry explained that he would be building his own cabin on the adjoining property. But you'll still visit us, won't you? Samuel asked anxiously. Every day, if your mother permits it, Henry replied, glancing at Katherine. Of course, she said, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks under his gaze. You'll always be welcome here. As spring fully arrived, the changes to the Sullivan homestead were remarkable. Henry hired workers to begin construction on his cabin about a quarter-mile from Katherine's house, but he continued to board with them in the meantime. He also arranged for repairs to her roof, reinforced the barn, and expanded the chicken coop. Katherine used part of her money to buy seeds and 2 milk cows, determined to make their land productive. With Henry's help, she planted a larger garden than she'd ever managed before, with rows of vegetables that promised a bountiful harvest by late summer. The children blossomed as well. Elizabeth, who had become somber beyond her years after her father's death, began to laugh again. Samuel followed Henry everywhere, absorbing knowledge about horses and cattle. Even little Lily, who had few memories of her father, began to reach for Henry when she needed comfort. It was this last development that caught Katherine by surprise one evening in late April. Lily had fallen and scraped her knee, and instead of running to her mother as usual, she had headed straight for Henry, arms outstretched. Without hesitation, he had scooped her up, examined the injury with exaggerated seriousness, then placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. There now, little miss, he had said. That's not so bad. Shall we clean it up? Watching them, Katherine had felt something shift inside her, a recognition that Henry had become more than a boarder or business partner. He had become essential to their lives. Yet she kept these thoughts to herself, uncertain of Henry's feelings and unwilling to risk the stability they had built. He was unfailingly kind and attentive, but never overstepped the boundaries of propriety. If his gaze sometimes lingered on her longer than necessary, if his hand occasionally brushed hers when passing the salt, she attributed it to wishful thinking on her part. Henry's cabin progressed rapidly. By early May, the main structure was complete, with just interior finishing work remaining. He began to move some of his belongings over, though he still took his meals with the Sullivans and spent evenings with them. One warm evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while the children played with Daisy in the yard, Henry broke their comfortable silence. "Katherine, there's something I need to discuss with you." She turned to him, noting the unusual seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" "I've received a telegram from Texas. There's business that requires my attention, a dispute over some cattle contracts that I need to resolve in person." Katherine felt her heart sink. "I see. When will you be leaving?" "Tomorrow, if possible. I've already arranged for the workers to continue with the cabin in my absence." He hesitated. "I should be gone about 3 weeks. 3 weeks, she repeated, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Well, we've managed without you before. We'll be fine." "I know you will," he said. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known." The compliment warmed her, but couldn't dispel the chill that had settled over her at the thought of his departure. "Will you tell the children tonight?" He nodded. "After supper. I don't want to spoil their play now." The children took the news better than Katherine had expected, though Samuel extracted a solemn promise that Henry would return no matter what. Elizabeth, more perceptive than her years would suggest, watched her mother's face carefully during the conversation. That night, after the house had gone quiet, Katherine sat at the kitchen table unable to sleep. The thought of Henry leaving, even temporarily, left her feeling unmoored. It was foolish, she told herself. They had survived before his arrival. They would manage during his absence. A soft knock at the kitchen doorway startled her. Henry stood there, also still dressed. "I saw the light," he explained. "Couldn't sleep either?" She shook her head. "Too much on my mind, I suppose." He came in and sat across from her, his expression thoughtful. "Katherine, there's something else I wanted to say before I leave. Something I've been meaning to tell you for some time." Her heart quickened. "Yes. When I first came to Whispering Creek, I wasn't just looking for land." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I was looking for someone. Someone. The man who killed your husband." Katherine stared at him, uncomprehending. "What?" Henry leaned forward, his eyes intense. "James Sullivan wasn't killed in a random robbery, Katherine. He was murdered by a man named Marcus Fletcher, a hired gun who works for a cattle syndicate based in Texas. The same syndicate that's been trying to force small ranchers out of business across 3 territories. "I don't understand," Katherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do you know this?" "Because I've been tracking Fletcher for over a year. I'm not just a cattle broker, Katherine. I work for the Pinkerton Detective Agency." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. "You're a detective? All this time, you've been, what, using us as cover for your investigation?" "No," Henry said firmly. "That was never my intention. I came to town tracking Fletcher's movements. The day I met you at the market, that was chance. Or fate, perhaps. But once I knew who you were, who your husband had been, I couldn't walk away." Katherine stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "So our entire relationship has been built on a lie?" "Your interest in the land, in my family, none of that was a lie," Henry interrupted, rising as well. "My feelings for you and the children are genuine. The land purchase was real. The agency has been looking to establish a presence in this territory, and this provided the perfect opportunity. And you didn't think I deserved to know the truth? About my husband's murder? About who you really are?" Her voice trembled with anger and hurt. Henry's expression was pained. "I wanted to tell you, but the investigation is sensitive. Fletcher is still out there, and he's dangerous. I was trying to protect you. I don't need your protection. I need honesty." Katherine turned away, blinking back tears. "Does your trip to Texas have anything to do with this Fletcher person?" "Yes. We've traced him to a ranch near Austin. With any luck, I'll return with him in custody." "And then what? You'll move on to your next assignment? Your next family in need?" The bitterness in her voice made him flinch. "Katherine, please. Let me explain everything properly." But she shook her head. "I think you should leave in the morning as planned, Mr. Caldwell. Or whatever your real name is." "It's still Henry Caldwell," he said quietly. That much is true. Good night, Mr. Caldwell, she said firmly, turning toward her bedroom. Katherine, he called after her, his voice urgent. Whatever else you may think of me, know this: I love you. I love your children. That's the most honest thing I can tell you. She paused at her door, her back still to him. Then your betrayal hurts all the more. Henry was gone when Katherine rose the next morning, his room swept clean of his belongings. Only a sealed envelope on the kitchen table indicated he had been there at all. She left it unopened, too hurt and confused to read his words. The children were devastated by his abrupt departure, especially when Katherine couldn't give them a satisfactory explanation. She told them only that Henry's business in Texas was urgent and that she didn't know when he would return. Days passed with no word. The workers continued on the cabin as instructed, but without Henry's presence, the homestead felt strangely empty. Katherine threw herself into work tending the garden, caring for the animals, taking pies to market, but her heart wasn't in it. At night, when the children were asleep, she would sometimes sit on the porch and stare at Henry's half-finished cabin in the moonlight, trying to reconcile the man she had come to care for with the detective who had kept such significant secrets. 2 weeks after Henry's departure, Katherine finally opened his letter. Inside, she found a detailed account of his investigation into James's murder, including evidence that pointed to a conspiracy far larger than a simple robbery gone wrong. The cattle syndicate had been systematically eliminating small ranchers who refused to sell their land, using intimidation and, when necessary, violence. James had apparently witnessed one such incident and had been preparing to testify against the men involved. His murder had been ordered to silence him. The letter ended with a plea for understanding and a promise to return, regardless of whether she could forgive him. Katherine read the letter 3 times, emotions warring within her. Anger at the deception, grief at learning the true circumstances of James's death, and beneath it all, a persistent ache of longing for Henry himself. That night, she dreamed of James. He stood in their bedroom, looking just as he had the morning of his death, but with a serenity that had often eluded him in life. "You deserve happiness, Kate," he said, using the nickname only he had ever called her. "The children need a father." She woke with tears on her face, but a strange sense of peace in her heart. Whatever Henry's methods, his goal had been justice for James, and his feelings for her family, she believed now, had been genuine. 3 days later, as Katherine was hanging laundry with Elizabeth's help, the sound of approaching horses made them both look up. 3 riders were coming down the road: the marshal, a stranger in a smart suit, and between them, Henry. Katherine's heart leapt, then faltered as they drew closer. Henry's face was bruised, a bandage visible at his collar, and he rode with the stiffness of a man in pain. "Stay with your brother and sister," she told Elizabeth, then hurried to meet the riders. "Mrs. Sullivan," the marshal called as they approached. "Got some news you'll want to hear." They dismounted near the porch, Henry moving gingerly. The stranger introduced himself as Agent Phillips of the Pinkerton Agency. "Mrs. Sullivan, we owe you an apology for the secrecy surrounding Agent Caldwell's assignment," he said formally. "But I'm pleased to inform you that Marcus Fletcher is now in custody, along with 2 of his associates. They've confessed to your husband's murder and implicated the syndicate leadership." Katherine barely heard him, her eyes fixed on Henry's battered face. "You're hurt." "It's nothing serious," Henry assured her, his voice rough. Fletcher didn't come quietly. The marshal cleared his throat. "There'll be a trial in Helena next month. You'll need to testify, Mrs. Sullivan, but it should be straightforward with the confessions we have." "Thank you, Marshal," she said, still watching Henry. "Would you and Agent Phillips care for some coffee before you ride back?" The marshal looked between her and Henry, then shook his head. "Much obliged, but we should get back to town. Caldwell here insisted on stopping by before we took him to the doctor. I can see to his injuries," Katherine said, finding her voice again. "If he's willing to stay." Henry's eyes met hers. Hope and uncertainty mingled in their blue depths. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said simply. After the marshal and Agent Phillips departed, Katherine led Henry into the house. The children, who had been watching from the window, erupted in excitement at the sight of him, rushing forward with questions and exclamations. Gently, Katherine cautioned them. "Mr. Caldwell is injured. Samuel, fetch the medical kit from my room. Elizabeth, put some water on to boil. Once the children were occupied with tasks, Katherine guided Henry to a chair at the kitchen table. "Let me see," she said, gently examining the cut along his jaw and the bruising on his cheekbone. "Katherine," he began, wincing as she cleaned the cut. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know that everything I told you about my feelings was true." She paused, her hands trembling slightly. "I read your letter. I understand why you couldn't tell me everything at first. But Henry, relationships, real ones, are built on trust." "I know." He caught her hand in his. "That's why I'm promising you now no more secrets. Ask me anything, and I'll answer honestly. Are you still a Pinkerton agent?" "Yes, though I've requested a permanent assignment to this region. The agency has agreed. The cabin will serve as both my home and a base of operations." "And these operations, will they be dangerous?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes, but primarily administrative. Coordinating with local law enforcement, gathering intelligence. Less fieldwork than before." She processed this, applying a clean bandage to his cut. "The children missed you terribly." "And I missed them," he said, his voice soft. "I missed you, Katherine. Every day I was gone." She met his gaze, seeing the sincerity there. "I missed you too, more than I wanted to admit." The children returned then, carrying the requested items and full of questions about Henry's injuries. He answered them patiently, downplaying the danger and emphasizing the successful capture of some bad men. That evening, after supper, with the children finally asleep after the excitement of Henry's return, they sat together on the porch. The night was warm, stars scattered across the clear Montana sky like diamonds on velvet. "Will you stay tonight?" Katherine asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Your room is still ready." Henry turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I'll stay as long as you'll have me, Katherine. But I need to be clear about something." "What's that?" He took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I don't want to be just your boarder anymore, or your business partner, or even your friend, though I treasure your friendship." Katherine's heart raced. "What do you want, Henry?" "I want to be your husband. I want to be a father to your children. I want us to be a family, a real one." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "I know it might seem too soon after James, and I would never try to replace him in your hearts. But I love you, Katherine Sullivan. I think I have since that first day at the market, when I saw you cutting that pie slice in half for your children while you went without." Tears welled in Katherine's eyes. "The children already love you. Samuel asks every day when you'll teach him to ride. Elizabeth saves her best drawings to show you. And Lily." She smiled through her tears. "Lily already thinks you hang the moon." "And their mother?" Henry asked softly, reaching up to brush a tear from her cheek. "Their mother has been fighting her feelings for the handsome boarder for months now," she admitted. "But she's ready to stop fighting." Henry leaned forward, his hand cradling her face as he kissed her gently. Katherine responded, her arms sliding around his neck as the kiss deepened, conveying all the longing and hope they had both carried. When they finally parted, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes, Mrs. Sullivan?" "Yes, Mr. Caldwell," she whispered. "On one condition." "Name it." "You finish that cabin quickly, because it's not proper for my fiancé to be living under the same roof before the wedding." Henry laughed, the sound rich and joyful in the night air. "I'll have it done in a week, though I'm not sure I'll be spending much time there once we're married." The wedding took place on a perfect June day, with wildflowers dotting the meadow between the two houses. The entire town turned out for the celebration, even Mr. Daniels, who had become notably more cordial since Katherine's financial situation had improved. Katherine wore a new dress of pale blue silk, with flowers in her hair arranged by Elizabeth's careful hands. Samuel proudly carried the rings, while Lily scattered flower petals with gleeful abandon. Daisy, now a well-fed and happy dog, watched the proceedings from beneath a nearby tree, occasionally barking her approval. The vows were simple but heartfelt. Henry promised to love and cherish not just Katherine, but all three children as his own. Katherine promised to support Henry in both his roles husband and lawman with understanding and faith. As the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Henry looked down at Katherine with such tenderness that she felt her heart might burst. "You and these children are the greatest blessing of my life," he whispered before kissing her to the cheers of their guests. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with dancing and feasting under lantern light. As the stars came out, Henry found Katherine sitting on the porch steps, watching the children play with their new friends. "Happy, Mrs. Caldwell?" he asked, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "More than I ever thought possible again," she replied honestly. "When James died, I thought my life was over. I was just existing for the children's sake. And now," she leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him. "Now I know that life can give second chances. That love can come again. Different, but just as true." Henry kissed the top of her head. "I've been thinking about something. The cabinet's nearly finished, but it feels wrong somehow to have two houses when we're one family. What are you suggesting? I thought we might connect them. Build a covered walkway between the two. Expand your kitchen into a proper dining room large enough for everyone. My cabin could be guest quarters or a place for the children as they grow older." Katherine smiled at the practical solution. "That sounds perfect. One family, one home, just with a little more space than most." As they sat watching the celebration continue around them, Samuel ran up, breathless with excitement. "Papa," he said, the words still new but spoken with complete confidence. "Mr. Peterson says there's going to be fireworks soon." Henry's eyes widened at being called Papa for the first time, and Katherine saw him swallow hard before responding. "Well then, we'd better get a good spot to watch, shouldn't we?" He stood, lifting Samuel onto his shoulders with ease despite his still healing injuries. Offering his free hand to Katherine, he helped her to her feet. "Shall we gather our girls and find that spot?" "Yes," she said, her heart full to bursting as she watched Elizabeth approaching with Lily in tow, both of them laughing at something Daisy had done. "Let's gather our family." That night, as fireworks bloomed above them like celestial flowers, Katherine looked around at the faces she loved: Elizabeth's serene smile, Samuel's wide-eyed wonder, Lily's delighted giggles, and Henry's steadfast presence beside her, his arm warm around her shoulders. "This is my family now," he had said that first day, sitting at her table. Words spoken with conviction before he even knew how true they would become. As if hearing her thoughts, Henry leaned close, his lips brushing her ear. "Thank you for letting me be part of your family." "Our family," she corrected gently, turning to meet his kiss as another burst of light illuminated the Montana sky, promising bright tomorrows for the family that love had built. 1 year later, as summer heat shimmered across the prosperous Sullivan Caldwell ranch, Katherine sat in the rocking chair on the expanded porch, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. Henry knelt beside her, his finger caught in the grip of their newborn son's tiny hand. "He has your eyes," Katherine said softly, tracing the baby's delicate features. "And your determination," Henry replied with a smile. "Listen to those lungs." The other children crowded around, eager for another glimpse of their new brother. Elizabeth, now 8, was already the perfect little mother's helper. Samuel had appointed himself guardian and protector. Even Lily, at 3, understood that she was no longer the baby of the family. "What shall we call him?" Henry asked, though they had discussed names for months. Katherine looked out at their land, the thriving garden, the healthy cattle grazing in the distance, the connected houses that had become one sprawling, loving home. "James," she said, meeting Henry's eyes. "James Henry Caldwell." Henry's gaze softened with understanding. "It's perfect." From inside came the sound of laughter as friends arrived for the baby's welcome celebration. The townspeople had embraced Henry not just as Katherine's husband, but as a respected lawman who had brought justice to their community. His work with the Pinkertons had expanded to training a small local force, ensuring safety for the growing settlement. "I never imagined this," Katherine confessed as Henry helped her to her feet. "When James died, I thought I would spend the rest of my life just struggling to survive. And now?" Henry asked, adjusting the blanket around his namesake. Katherine looked around at the home they had built together, not just the physical structure, but the love that filled it. "Now I know that family isn't just what you're born into. It's also what you build, what you choose, what you fight for." Henry gathered the older children close, forming a protective circle around Katherine and the baby. "This is our family now," he said, echoing those words that had changed everything. "And always will be." As they walked together into the house to greet their guests, Katherine felt a sense of completion she had never thought possible after her loss. Life had not turned out as she had planned, but it had given her something precious, a second chance at love, a family stronger for having weathered storms, and a future bright with possibility. The children ran ahead, eager to show off their new brother to the visitors. Henry kept his arm around Katherine, supporting her still tender body as they crossed the threshold into the home that love had transformed. "Happy?" he asked softly, just for her ears. "Beyond measure," she replied, lifting her face for his kiss as their newborn son slept peacefully between them, the newest member of a family forged through loss, courage, and the unexpected blessing of a second chance.